All right, welcome back, Raider Nation. It's time for Silver and Black today, the post-game edition powered by our good friends at BetUS. And let me remind you that you can get 150% sign-up bonus up to $2,000 on your first deposit. Just use the promo code YouTube150. That's YouTube150. Come play with us today. And I actually made you some money today. We'll talk about that when we come back. But we are back talking Raiders football. Raiders 34-19. They lose to the Miami Dolphins on the road in Miami. Scott Gulbransen with you here. And joining me as always is Murf from Raiders Fan Radio with our Voice of the Fan. Murf is with us and we'll get to him in just a second. But the Raiders start out again, just can't get things together. And despite the week off, which we know they didn't practice, are unable to get anything really going significantly on offense other than a few nice drives here and there. And the Raiders defense continues to struggle as well. Murf, we come back. We talk about this after the bye week. I was suspect that they gave the team the bye week off. I get it. Sometimes you got to do that when you had those switches. You had Scott Turner come in with Norv Turner, try to get this offense. And we saw some good things out of the offense. I think different things out of the offense we'll get to. But overall, I think the team was making the same kind of mistakes we saw before the bye. So you have to wonder sort of what the mindset is internally, and if there's just kind of a malaise that's set in for this entire roster, and the fact that they can't seemingly put it together and really get out there and do, I think, what some of the people thought this roster would do, especially on the defense.
Yeah. So first and foremost, thanks for having me back on, Scott. It's been like a month since we've done Black today on the post-game show, and not much has changed other than our offensive coordinator and his old man checking into the building. But it was so funny because I remember after the Bengals game, it was like I made a post as a joke, and I was like, hey, Scott, check in with old Norval and see if he's busy. Maybe he can come in and mentor you to start calling plays for this team. And sure enough, that's what we saw. But unfortunately, the output was relatively close to the same. I bet the under today, and unfortunately, our blown coverage there at the end of the game by the defense cost that under. Shout out BetUS. But yeah, man, it seems like it's a little bit different. But at the end of the day, it's still the same thing that we've seen out of this Raider football team for the entirety of this season. And, Scott, this has been a really, unfortunately, negative week especially since the last time that we talked. Raider Nation is down bad. I mean, you've got the tank army out there going. You've got everybody out there naked. I even noticed it creeping into when I started tweeting about other things like Mike Tyson and other things. This negativity, this sports negativity that I have right now that's highly influenced by the Raiders. Scott, it's just permeating other areas of my life. And I'm like, all right, wait a minute now. You're 52 years old. You can't let this shit happen anymore. I gotta slow that thing down and still try to remain positive. But it makes it tough. I mean, so I'll say this and then flip it back over to you on this. If there was anything positive today, is that at least in the first half, 98 was showing up being 98, and the inverse of 98 is 89. And that kid, man, Brock Bowers is absolutely the future and the face of this organization, along with Max Crosby. And so, anyway, so there was at least some things positive to be taken away, but yeah, offensively, Scott, the output was about the same, other than a little bit of a different layout when in terms of at least we attacked the line of scrimmage a little bit more. They tried to get Zamir White going early. That didn't work, and ended up relying on Madison, and then he gets hurt, and then here comes Amir Abdullah. Shout out that, year 11 for Amir Abdullah, getting into the end zone there and making a little bit of a game. But at the end of the day, Scott, this Raiders team is just ultimately outmatched and overcoached in seemingly every football game.
Yeah, and to me, that's what I was most interested in. And Mo talked about, I know you guys talked about it too during your show this week, which was what are we going to see from this offense? Nobody was expecting miracles, Murph. Nobody was expecting this offensive team to suddenly come out and be one of the best in the NFL. I think what everybody was looking for was, okay, are you going to use the weapons that you have? Are we going to see some things different that weren't used under Getsy, and that maybe Scott Turner would free things up a little bit and be more aggressive? And I think you're right. I think we saw that clearly. They went to Brock Bowers, 100% right thing to do. And it shows what happens when you do it. Other people, though, like Trey Tucker, didn't really get involved in the game. I know he had a penalty and some other things going on, but they didn't really get him involved in the game. You had Jacoby Myers, who had this game, But again, it just seemed to me like the play calling and what they were doing, at times it was good. I liked the little running play they had to Jacoby Myers earlier in the game. I thought, okay, this is different. This is creative. This is something I haven't seen. But then it didn't seem like they were going to challenge or go downfield at all. And I think against this Dolphins defense, you were going to have to do that. They're good defense. You're going to have to run the ball because the Dolphins are much better against the pass than the run, by the way, as you saw today. And they still could not establish the run. That, I think, is something that we weren't going to see get repaired over 1 week. So it wasn't surprising. It might be disappointing to fans out there, but they couldn't establish the run. And if they couldn't establish the run, in my view, Murph, they weren't going to beat the Dolphins. And that held true.
Yeah, Scott, there's so many areas to get into. I'm trying to keep up with the chat over here. And George Ford in there says there needs to be a 30 for 30 on what happens on week 3 against the Panthers. It was like, this thing is just slowly unraveled, since that week. It was like, how do you go from, and I ask you this, Scott, how do you go from being as impactful and not want to call them dominant, but as reactive as the Raiders were in week 2 against the freaking, and I remember I was on the road, I was at the beach. It was a big week. We did this post-game show after beating the Baltimore Ravens, and it was like, whoa, like sky's the limit for this team. And considering what we did at the end of last year, and then having that type of a response in a win. Yeah, week 1 was tough against the Chargers, but then to rebound and to beat the Ravens, who we know are a Super Bowl favorite, led by a league potential MVP in Lamar Jackson, to take that leap and then absolutely die the next week and just turn in a dog shit performance against the Carolina Panthers, who are, if not the worst team in the NFL, one of the worst. And then it's just been this steady decline since then. So I flip it back over to you, Scott, is that I know you all have been highly critical of Antonio Pierce. I reluctantly have been highly critical of Antonio Pierce and highly critical of the Raiders as a whole. Big picture style here. You're the journalist, you're the pro on this. I'm just a knucklehead fan. How did we go from that to this at this point, Scott? Like, is there any one thing we can point a finger at, or do you feel like it's, I hate to say organizational, because I'm a big fan of Mark Davis and will always be, and rarely criticize that man. But what gets us to this? What gets us to this point, Scott?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think you're right. I don't think there's one answer. I think there's several answers, because you have coaching issues. That, since you started with that, yes, absolutely. And this is why when people talk to me about Antonio Pierce, well, you have to give him a second year and this and that. It's not his fault that he's got injuries. It's not his fault that they signed Gardner Minshew and he doesn't have a quarterback. That's all true. But what isn't true is the fact that you watch a team and how it's coached and how it's prepared. The Raiders could be a bad team. There's differences, right? So everybody keeps asking or going back to the Dan Campbell example, which there's many problems with doing that. It's not apples to apples. But one of those things is, well, yeah, he was 3-13. Remember his first year? Yes, he was. But if you look at those losses, he had 2 blowout losses, really, in that 3-13. You look at the Raiders. I did the numbers before I came on. In the last 3 games alone, the Raiders defense has given up 102 points. Okay. Brutal. And if you look at 5, they're now 2-8. 5 of their 8 losses, okay, were by 30 plus points. Okay. So what's happening here is even the Raiders deficient in talent. Okay. And this isn't against good teams, right? This isn't against great teams. It's not like they're losing against the class of the NFL. They're not losing against the Lions. They're not losing against these teams who put up a lot of points on the board. What you have to look at there is the team coming, even if they get beat, fine. But are they coming prepared? Do they know what they're doing on offense? Is there good communication? Because look, you can have second-tier players that aren't going to be guys that are going to take you to a championship. But again, I think the Raider players continue to play hard. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not ever going to question the effort because I haven't seen anybody quit. I really haven't. But you look at that and you say, okay, so why do they get beat on that last touchdown by the Dolphins where nobody knows to cover whom? They're just completely confused by it. Those things, the penalties we talk about, the stupid penalties that we talk about, and the time in which those penalties come, the seemingly lack of understanding of their own concepts of what they're doing. To me, that's the coaching. The personnel side, look, this team went really into a rough spot when it couldn't get a quarterback, couldn't get a young quarterback to develop around. And a lot of people criticize them for signing Minshew, but at the time, Minshew was really the number 2 free agent out there behind Kirk Cousins, because nobody knew that Matt Darnold was going to come along and have a pretty good season. Nobody knew that. I mean, if they would have signed Matt Darnold, Murph, you would have had all of the fans of Raider Nation going crazy, right? And now he's actually come down to earth a little bit. So I think you have a situation here with personnel, and you have a situation with coaching. So there's a lot to go around. This mix and this malaise that's come up is because of all of those reasons, not just one. That's why I don't just blame Antonio Pierce. I don't think that he long-term is the answer either. And every game that goes by, that seems to be proven correctly. But I also believe that, yes, the Raiders need to do more to beef up this roster. They had a good draft last year. Okay. They did well. Tom Telesco did well. I mean, look at Brock Bowers. So you look at those things, you say, okay, now next year they go in with almost $90 million of cap space. So you should be able to fix some of those things. But from that standpoint, it's just tough, because you're right. The mentality, there's a lot of different guys on this team that were there last year, but they've gone from that kind of scrappy unit that really fought for their coach last year, that seemed to put it together, especially defensively towards the end of last year. It seems now like they've completely reverted back to something that people didn't like when Josh McDaniels was there.
You brought up, you use the term malaise, Scott, and you and I are both educated in leadership, and that's not even just educated, but like that's a passion of ours, right? Yeah. And leading teams and leading people and institutions and whatnot in our day jobs. And I would say that, well, this is your day job, but you know what I'm talking about when you weren't doing this. But that idea that there are different styles of leadership, and one of them is laissez-faire, which is basically where you turn it over to your constituents, and you kind of let your constituents do what they're going to do. And one of the criticisms, and again, few criticisms, because I'm rooting for him even still to this day after this game, still rooting for Antonio Pierce. It would be my preference for the Raiders to run the table and win every game from the rest of the way out. That's my preference, and I'm rooting for him to do so. That said, but if I am going to offer up fair criticism, it is this: is that a laissez-faire leadership style is where you sit back and you let your constituents kind of do what they do. Like, you give them a loose structure. Here's where you got to be. Here's what time you got to be there. And there's a difference between the John Madden version of that, which was be on time, pay attention, and play like hell on Sunday, versus be on time. You know what I mean? There's a difference in that. And so that the laissez-faire style of leadership allows your constituents, your institution to basically run itself. And I feel that, like, when I look at Antonio Pierce, and I don't know, I'm not in the building, I'm just a fan. I watch on TV and read Twitter posts just like everybody else that's on here. So I'm not trying to be like an insider here. I'm not trying to front on that. But I am trying to tell you this, is that with that style of leadership, that typically it lacks structure and lacks organization. And that's not what, at the end of the day, your crew wants. They want to know that they want to be instructed. They want to be led. They want to be governed. They want to have that structure. And we heard that criticism come out from the Raiders this week, is that there was inefficiency. There was deficiency. There was all these are highly freaking indicative terms of what's going on from a leadership perspective. And Scott, that was the last thing I expected out of Antonio Pierce.
Me too.
Being that like he's a hard nose, he's a gritty guy. This guy was not handed his NFL career. He had to earn every single snap, the guy, he wasn't a high draft pick. He wasn't like, this was a scrappy. And so that the idea that he had to work so hard maybe is informed him that everyone else is willing to work as hard as he is. And that's clearly not the case. And while, like you said, that the players are not giving up, and I don't sense there's any quit in this team. I think that we squashed any of that back in week 2 or week 3, whenever it was, we had our first all team meeting. But I think we were able to squash that. But this whole idea that, like, I think that there's a version of the Raiders right now where they're kind of governing themselves. And I just don't think that's successful in the NFL. And while you don't want to be oppressive like a Josh McDaniels, I think that you can overswing too far, but there is an idea of a player's coach. And right now he's a player's player. He doesn't strike me as a player's coach like Dan Campbell. So to go to that example, which people love throwing around all the time, you said it, Scott, it's apples and oranges. And I truly believe that too, that the idea that, like, I think a better comparison, frankly, is D'Amico Ryans. Like that to me is a better comparison of Antonio Pierce and D'Amico. But when you look at D'Amico Ryans, he's got what? A franchise quarterback, first and foremost. But he seemingly has a much more hands-on leadership approach than what Antonio Pierce does. Now, that might be too theoretical and off the board for people that are looking for X's and O's over here. But listen, again, just being as a fan of looking at a thing from a 30,000-foot view, which is all that we can do, that's what my eyes and my mind tells me. And, it's only worth what it is. But that's and I'll say this, I'm going to shut up. Isn't that funny, Scott? Here we are. This is the fan reaction portion of the show. And that's my fan reaction. I'm trying to study the Raiders as an institution instead of talking about some X's and O's or what, the difference in the offense between, Scott Turner and Luke Getsy and some of the more intricacies of the game. We're looking at the institution of the Raiders is well, this all kind of sucks. So what can we do to better it? And oh my gosh, I'll say this. Let's hope Tom Brady. Let's hope Richard Seymour. Let's hope that those folks in positions of influence, Sandra Douglas Morgan, have an energy and a voice around the team and the future of this Raiders football team. Because right now, Scott, again, we're just down bad.
There you go. A big shout out to Raider Nate, by the way, $10 donation to the One Nation Foundation, which you'll hear about later from Murf. It's interesting because you and I were joking before we went on the air because we had some folks tweeting at us, tweeting at me and say, oh, you like when the Raiders lose? No, I don't want to do a show about a losing team. I mean, listen, I've been doing it for 8 years and there hasn't been much winning. And so believe me, I not only would like to see them win, I know you do. It's a much better for our show, for Murph's show, and for everybody's show if the Raiders do well. I mean, that's just the way it is. So you look at that, but I think there's something to what you said. And I often wonder if maybe, just maybe, I'm not giving Mark Davis enough credit to maybe he hired Antonio Pierce knowing that this year might be a little difficult. And so, hey, give him a shot, see what he does. There's not much to lose because maybe the expectation internally wasn't as high as some of us had outside the building. And so it's hey, give this guy who doesn't have a lot of experience chance. If he does an amazing job and he's able to take this team and make what he can out of it, great. Then we'll keep him and we move forward. If he doesn't, then we gave him a shot and we say goodbye. I don't know that that's true. Again, I'm just completely guessing. But I look at what this team has done since he's taken over. You saw that kind of lift last year. What I keep saying, though, is that I've not seen anything about this team get better. And listen, injuries matter. No question. For those of you guys who are going to bring up injuries on defense, on all that kind of stuff, doesn't matter. Not having a quarterback matters a lot, a lot. But at the same time, discipline and all those types of things, the things that you expected from Antonio Pierce, the things that you expected this team, right, Murph, to have an identity, at least that you could identify, 100%. Right? And that doesn't mean you win games. You could separate those two. You could be a hard-nosed, punch them in the mouth kind of team on offense and defense, and you just don't win, right? Because you're lacking talent or whatever it is, or you have injuries. But when you don't have that and you have this sort of, when I watch the Raiders, I just kind of blah. There's not a lot of personality there. There's not a lot of identity there to say that, look, they might be losing, but man, these guys are aggressive. They go downfield. They do this, they do that. It's just not there. And so I think that that's where fans get really discouraged, is because they look at it and say, well, what do I have to be excited about? Even if they were losing and you saw some fight in them, meaning that, wow, they're really giving it to this team, even though they're getting their ass kicked. You don't see that. And I think, as a fan, if I was a fan of the Raiders and I'm watching, I just want to see you fight, yes, but I also want to see who you are a little bit so that next year when we build on this thing, you can kind of feel good about it, right? But I think that's what it lacks. It lacks a little bit of that, and it lacks just that what I think people were promised by Antonio Pierce, right? Which is the attitude. Forget the wins and losses again. I put that aside. It was the attitude, the physicality, the pain, blah, 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 blah. You just don't see that.
Yeah, and I don't want to turn into I don't want this to be the Antonio Pierce pick on hour by Murf here, but it's absolutely true, and I think that that's one of the things that there's been a handful of communications that have happened with AP and this coaching staff as the season has progressed. And I remember early on, one of the reporters in the room asked him, "How long is it going to take for guys to buy in?" And this was early. This was like week one, maybe. This was real early in the year. And he was like, they're already bought in. They're already there. And so, but they weren't. And so, because we heard that from him then later, that guys are still trying to find an identity to this football team. And he said, we're still searching for that. That was the second thing that stood out to me, because I thought the identity was ill intent, violence, physicality, pain, like that whole thing, like you just brought up, right? Mm-hmm. And so there was it's like we get these mixed messages. And actually, if I rewind the clock even further, the first one that didn't make sense and went awry was, we don't want to have, and we're not going to have, a Band-Aid at quarterback. And then they came up with 2 Band-Aids for quarterback. And so, it's like, I look at this thing and I'm like, okay, so we're hearing these words and we're hearing these intents, but they don't show up. And since that week, or that last week of the season when we beat the Broncos, since then, it hasn't shown up. And so I made a point, Scott. Actually, let me say this. The regression that you mentioned has been abundant. There's been regression at every single position, and that's an ultimate indictment of head coaching. I've heard that a long, long time ago, and it's the truth. And it's the truth within institutions as a whole. When you get worse at the person that's at the top, like, that's not a good reflection on what they're able to do. And there's not one position other than maybe Brock Bowers to where on the field that this team has gotten better. And so I think that it's unfair if we don't hold Antonio Pierce accountable to his words and to his intent and the things that he's done on the field. And so, but it's not just him though. And that's where I hate this to turn into, and he's at the top. And so he's going to get the biggest finger, but like, and not the middle one, but you know what I'm trying to say. But I go back to it. Oh man, I'll spit it out. Sorry, I'm a mess, Scott. I haven't seen you in a month. I don't know what to do with my work.
I know, man. But that's the thing, is you have the coaching situation, and you're right. We talk about that, but also, the organization was not able to do what it needed to do. Not that I'm not saying that it failed per se, because look, to get a quarterback, everybody talks about, well, they could have got up Jaden down. Those teams didn't want to trade down. So you have to have a partner. So you want to call it bad luck. You want to call this goes back to the lack of a plan after Derek Carr to begin with, right? That's what it really goes back to. Those people are all gone. They paid for partly that, and they lost their jobs. So you understand that piece of it. But the rest of it, you're absolutely correct. I mean, they weren't able to get a quarterback to come in and do what they needed to do. And so they hired a GM before they had the coach. I mean, a coach before they had the GM. And so the GM and the coach, they might have a fine relationship, but you don't know. They're not bought into each other. You don't know what it is. And Tom Telesco has a horrible record of hiring coaches, by the way. That's why if Antonio Pierce doesn't make it to full year number 2, then I would advocate that Tom Brady or somebody else be in charge of it and not Tom Telesco for Raider fans' sake. But yeah, I mean, look, a lot of things have gone wrong this season, and who could have guessed a lot of what's happened, including the mess with Devontae Adams, who of course is creating another mess in New York now. So maybe that was a good thing, but it happens that way sometimes with these teams, and you want to rebuild. And a lot of people, I had Brian with a nice comment and saying, hey, well, you can't fire coaches every year or two and then expect to be a winning franchise. And I would say you're right. Although if you have the wrong person, whether it's a GM, whether it's a coach, you don't stick with them just because you don't want to fire somebody, or because of that fact. Because you look at Houston's been able to do it. They got the right quarterback, of course. So that's what you have to be able to do. So we have also, and Brian, yes, they've had the same staff for the last 2 years, but look, before that, they had 3 staffs in 3 consecutive years, including an interim head coach. That was my point. So, but absolutely right. You have to get stability. Eventually, you just have to hire the right people, and that lies with Mark Davis. All right, we're going to take a quick break for our podcast audience. When we come back, we'll get to some of the other players to call out, because there were some good performances today as well. You want to talk about a little bit about those and some other things. And we'll also hear from Murf about the One Nation Foundation and what he's up to in just a minute. You're listening to Silver and Black today, brought to you by our good friends on video, our good friends BetUS, which you can get 150% sign-up bonus. Just use the code YouTube150. And a reminder, we are an Odyssey Sports Original Podcast. Make sure you follow us and make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. We'd appreciate it. We'll be back right after this. All right, for the video audience, we're back already, see? Because the podcast audience, they just hear it on a recording, so you don't have to wait. We can go right back into it. Murf from Raiders Fan Radio, along with Scott Gulbransen here from Silver and Black today with our post-game show. And Murf, you look at the game today, there was a good thing. And I'm going to start with Gardner Minshew, because a lot of people were / upset or kind of confused by why Antonio Pierce said during the press conference late in the week that he gave them the best chance to win instead of Desmond Ridder. So they went with Gardner Minshew despite his 8 interceptions. And of course, he had his 9th today, although I would say that 9th interception necessarily wasn't on him, but we'll see. But Gardner Minshew today, 30 of 43, 282 yards, 2 touchdowns, and of course, as I mentioned, the 1 interception. Murph, I thought, Gardner Minshew had moments that were good, and he had moments that were bad. He missed some really easy passes, and I think he still has trouble reading the offense. For whatever reason, he's regressed there too. He didn't look like this last year in Indianapolis, where he had a better play caller, frankly, with the Colts in Shane Steichen. So you look at what he's able to do, and it just seems like he goes to his first, second read, and that's it. And if it's not there, then he does something crazy. He was better today, but they threw the ball 43 times, which tells you how bad the running game was, because the Raiders, the leading rusher for the Raiders was Jacoby Myers, and that was on 1 run with 20 yards. Alexander Mattison had 5 carries for 19 yards, Zamir White 5 for 9, and so on and so forth. So this Raider team, I thought Gardner Minshew did better, but he's just not the same player he was even last year because of the situation. And so I think you stick with him because why not? And for those of you who want to quote unquote tank, then great. But overall, he did better protecting the ball. The 1 interception looked like Jacoby Myers went the wrong way on the route. I'll have to rewatch that. So I'm not going to excuse him yet. But overall, did better, but just not good enough to get this offense where it needed to be.
Yeah, and I thought it was really funny this last week. I mean, we got a big kick out of it here at Raiders Fan Radio, where Antonio Pierce's press conference. I'm not getting about AP again. I promise. I want to talk about the on-field. But when he announces that Gardner Minshew is going to be the starting quarterback, because we just need to give him confidence, and I'm like, what do you mean give him confidence? You mean like after you yanked him out and put Aiden O'Connell in, and then after he went back in and then stunk up the joint, then you made a move to bring in Desmond Ridder? And like, what the heck? Like, this dude's had a target on his back from day one. So, and I'm not defending Gardner Minshew at all, but give him confidence, because according to Antonio Pierce, what else do we have to lose? I'm like, I don't know, jobs? Like, there's a whole shit you can lose here. There's not like there's nothing on the line. But anyways, I think the Gardner shot at this point. I mean, he was better today because the Turners put him in better positions to be successful, which I applaud. That there was definitely a difference. We saw, play action on first down. We saw like get rid of the ball quick. You mentioned it was like first or second read, and while I don't look at that necessarily as being critical of Gardner. I think that's intentional, Scott. I think it was like, look, get the ball in your hand, 1, 2. If not, make something happen and get it out of bounds. We saw the ball sail out of the back of the end zone. We saw it go through the sideline. Even Ross Tucker today was like, I think that was intended for a cheerleader, but good. Because better that than force something over the middle across your body and have a bad pick. So I thought we definitely saw a different Gardner Minshew today, but we didn't see a dog today. And that's what we need. We need to have a dog at quarterback. And we've lacked that. You said that, going back a couple of years, the lack of plan since Derek Carr. And I would even rewind the clock back further than that, because Derek hadn't been Derek since 2017. Whatever happened in the locker room in Washington on Monday Night Football in 2017, that's the last that we saw of that competitive dog that we had in Derek Carr. And so since then, the Raiders' inability to address the quarterback position is showing up now in spades. Is that like it's costing us football games, numerous football games, and has cost us numerous football games for years, because you've got this. I say this all the time, and I will stand on this, and it holds true. And doesn't matter what version of football you're playing, you've got to score touchdowns in the red zone. How many times we see the Raiders in the red zone today and we didn't score? That's what we were critical of Derek about, and that's what I'm going to be critical of Gardner and Jimmy G and everybody else and AOC and everybody else. Score when you're in the damn red zone. Put the ball in the end. We've got to score in the red zone. We've got to convert on third down. Our third down conversions today, at one point we were like 6 of 12, and they're like, oh, the Raiders have done a decent job converting third downs. And I'm like, did they though? Like, I mean, is it 50%? Is that good? I don't think so. Like, we've got to be above 60% on converting on third down. The other thing, don't turn the ball over. And ultimately, what happened today? We had a bad interception, and I know that that could be on the receiver.
Either way, it's still a turnover.
It's still a turnover, man. So it's like you have certain things that like you have to do as a football team to be successful. Those are just 3 things. Here's another thing on defense: get the ball back for your offense. Where's the turnovers? Where's this Jack Jones that's got 4 pick sixes in his career? Where is he? I know he got hurt. I know Jack Bennett got hurt. I know that once Max started getting dominant, they double teamed him and basically focused the entirety of the blocking scheme to neutralize Max Crosby, but nobody else shows up. And yes, that could be because Malcolm Kuntz is has been hurt, but like, where's Tyree Wilson? Like what? Like, so, I mean, we could go on and on and on down the list, but ultimately at the end of the day, Scott, it's like, we are devoid. I hate to say this, man, but we are devoid of depth. And that's been the story of the Raiders team for a very long time. And it goes back, again, to go back to the quarterback conversation. We didn't build depth at QB. You got the Falcons out there drafting Michael Penix in the first round and parking his ass on the bench to sit behind Captain Kirk for a couple of years. and seemingly by the time Michael Penix is 30 years old and takes the field as a starter, he's probably going to ball out and be a league MVP, for crying out loud. But it was my point being, though, is that like the lack of long-term focus for this Raiders team is really coming to roost. And maybe it's because, Scott, that we've had such turnover. But I'm going to say one more last thing and then flip it back to you on the fans out there that are afraid of turnover. I understand, not making light of the term, but I understand that we have PTSD when it comes to the coaching carousel. But this is going to be a transitional time for the Raiders. Coaching, performance, on-field performance, doesn't matter. Regardless, this is a transitional time for the Raiders. We've got new ownership coming in for the first time since Al Davis passed away and passed it on to Carroll and his kid. So we've got new ownership coming into the Raiders. We're going to have a new franchise quarterback. Like, there are transitional things about this football team that are generational for this Raiders team. We haven't seen it. We haven't seen high round draft picks of quarterbacks other than Kenny Stabler, Jamarcus Russell, and Derek Carr, for crying out loud. We're in a transitional time for this team. So I'm of the opinion that you hit the reset button on all of it. But this is not reactionary. It's not like, this is not the coaching carousel type of decision and thinking going into it. It's that all these other things, heck, we're almost still 5 years into a brand new city and a new facility, for crying out loud. Like, I'm sure Mark Davis's house is still getting built. Point being is that if you're transitioning in all these other areas of football, why not just make it a clean sweep, man? Let's get a fresh and get minds in, Scott.
Well, and to your point about transition is getting the right people in the building to help you make those decisions, right? Because to your point, and again, I think Mark Davis always tries to make the right decision, and I think he wants to win. Obviously, he's got a big cloud over his shoulder, which is his dad, how his dad ran, and even though towards the end of Al's life it was difficult too, he wants to win. I mean, nobody owns a team and wants to lose. There's been a very few examples of those people, and most of them are out of the business now. But if you look at it, I think that's what they have to do. So when you think about starting over, so to speak, that's where I think Raider fans, you have to look at it and say, if it's just Mark Davis firing somebody and hiring somebody again, then I would be concerned. But if it's you bring in your new ownership group with Richard Seymour and Tom Brady, and those guys are involved heavily in the decision-making process, and they bring on somebody as a president of football operations or whatever it is, then you could say, okay, this is different this time. This is how teams who are trying to build long-term and to build sustainability as far as being a championship caliber club, they need that kind of stuff. So if you see that, fine. If it's just the same old, I can see being disappointed and talking about turnover. But if they do it the right way and show you that they're doing it differently, then I think, hey, then it's a situation where you're on the right track. And it starts with player acquisition. It starts with draft. You have to draft. The culmination of what you're seeing too here, Murph, and I know you guys have talked about this many times on your show, is how many bad drafts the Raiders have had over the last 20 years. And how much, by the way, shout out to Raider Ryan for his $5 donation to the One Nation Foundation. Thank you so much, man. You look at that and how many drafts they've fumbled, frankly. That kills your team. You can't, in the NFL today with salary cap, you cannot build a team with just free agents and occasional good draft pick. You have to nail it more times than you don't. That doesn't mean you're going to nail everyone, but you definitely have to have the majority of them come through, especially in those middle rounds and the high rounds, the first, second round picks. When you're bleeding first or second round picks and you don't have them playing on your team within 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, that's trouble. And we saw what happened with the Raiders. By the way, Raider Ryan did say, if we can't beat the Dolphins, do you think there's a game on our schedule that we can win? Maybe the Jaguars. Yes, I think the Jaguars might be. But as of right now, I could not pick the Raiders against anyone, Murph. I don't know about you. And that's not being negative. It's just I have not seen anything that tells me this team can put 4 quarters together and beat a team.
No, I don't expect the Raiders to do anything on the way out of this thing. And I'll tell you, I think our Super Bowl is going to be the Saints. Like, and I know that there's a huge contingent of Derek Carr fans out there, and God bless you all. I talked about Derek earlier, and he's not hasn't been the same player since the first half of 2017, and I stand by that. I will stand by that forever. But I am also equally as appreciative of what he did for the Raiders in his time in the silver and black. I think that he bled for the Raiders, and I think that there is a component of Derek Carr that I will never not be a fan of. Like there was, I love that guy, and the that pass that he made to Michael Crabtree in the front corner of the end zone against the Chiefs on, was it Thursday night or whatever the heck it was, with those AFL uniforms on. Like, I mean, I used to tell my kids, like, you can't go out in the backyard and do what Derek did and hit a fence post, let alone moving Michael Crabtree falling down to his knees in the front of the corner of the end zone. So, like, I will always have a high level of appreciation for Derek. The pass to Crabtree in the back of the end zone against the Ravens. The heck, the pass to T.Y. Hilton in the Pro Bowl, for crying out loud. Like, Derek was great multiple times. But ultimately, Scott, where was I going with that? Why was I talking about Derek Carr?
You were talking about just how different change and having plans and having your organization really, because you're going to have turnover again, perhaps, that you have a plan and that you start to execute against that, not just be reactionary is where you started.
Oh, I know. No, I was talking about that schedule. So yeah. I love Derek Carr, right? So that said, the Raiders Super Bowl, gosh, I'm 52 years old, Scott. The mind is going.
I'm with you there, brother.
Round of games hasn't even started yet, and I'm ready for a nap. But anyways, but point being though is that, like, I think that you asked if there's winnable games left on the schedule. I think that's the one that Raider Nation wants to see. Like, I love Derek, but I don't want to get beat by Derek. I don't want Derek to be the one that puts a pin in the frickin', the 2024 season for our Las Vegas Raiders, having him walk off into the sunset, knowing that he can beat the Raiders. I think that ultimately, and then before that, we got the Jaguars. So one of those two games, I think are winnable for us. But, look, the Saints still got a lot of weapons, for crying out loud. The Saints can still do it. But ultimately, I think that's it. If I had to pick one on the schedule, I think, Scott, that would be it, because Kansas City is going to whip our ass. I don't have any expectation against the Broncos. Anything in the division is pretty much toast. You know what I mean? At this point. So it's going to be an uphill climb for the Raiders on all the games.
Yeah, and it's one of those deals where I really think that I mean, you'd like to see the Raiders put some good play together, but at the same time, as I can see from people in the chat talking about tanking and embracing the tank, you also know what you need for this team. You've got to get the quarterback position dialed in, and you got to take that chance at a high draft pick if you like one of those guys. And if that's the case, then you sort of want to do well, but at the same time, you're not going to go crazy thinking, well, if they lose, I'm really upset, because you kind of know where the Raiders are right now. And there's some other things that could get better over the season. I'd like to see the coaching get better, and Antonio Pierce somehow retain his job would be a nice story. I don't see it happening again, but at the same time, you also have players out there. What players want to bleed silver and black? We know Max Crosby does. There's no question there. But who of those other guys want to be on the Raiders? Who wants to be there? If they come in and they switch up the coaching staff and change some personnel, who wants to be there? And at the end of the day, we knew Devontae Adams didn't want to be there. Clearly, he has to get out. And some of the folks, we'll see how they play, because now you go on a few more weeks, Murph, and you're going to see they know there's not much to play for other than their own pride and their teammates. So you're going to see kind of who is all in. And to me, that's going to be something that, if I'm a fan, that's what I'm watching for, because I want to see, okay, who's playing hard, wants to come back next year, makes realistic sense to bring back and do it from that way. Because I'm just trying to find positives for fans to look into, because we'll be here, we'll talk about it, and we'll, of course, break down the games and the deficiencies and what they did well. And again, big shout out to Brock Bowers. I mean, just insane. 13 receptions, 124 yards, just crazy. And he's had the most catches in NFL history by a rookie tight end in a game as of today. That's another record he broke. So
Dicka's record that he broke?
Yep. Yep, 13 receptions. The old record was 11. So there you go. You got it. Yep. And so that's wow. Brock Bowers. So you got to be excited about Brock Bowers now. Who's going to throw to him? Imagine if they have a more steady quarterback and a better offensive system in there, how big he's going to be for this offense. Add in another wide receiver. Maybe you draft a young running back. And we're going to start getting into draft stuff as we move forward for the next couple of weeks. But go ahead, Murph.
I got a question for you on the draft. So everybody is all about quarterback. And I agree. Okay. So, but we got to have free agency happen before we see the draft. So if there's a world where the Falcons look at the way that Captain Kirk is playing, and I'm throwing out hypotheticals here, but scenario wise, because we don't know yet, because there's so many variables about the draft and everything else, right? So say there's a world where they look at Kirk and they go, okay, we're going to get 3 more years of high level production out of Kirk. The Raiders make a 2 first offer, or a first and a second offer for a Michael Penix, and acquire somebody like that. It could be Michael Penix, could be Hendon Hooker, it could be. So we acquire a quarterback, okay, in free agency, and then you look at the draft. It's best player available. It could be a Travis Hunter. It could be an Ashton Jeanty. It could be do you see? Because I've a good friend of our show, QB Jeff, shout out the Group of 5 guys. Ashton, he plays at Boise State, Group of 5 school. And that guy is his comp, don't, it's not my opinion, Raider Nation. It's what the pros will tell you. The comp is Barry Sanders. So you have a generational player offensively like a Brock Bowers. Could you acquire a generational player like an Ashton Jeanty or a Travis Hunter and then supplement the quarterback play with a free agent acquisition? Is there any reasoning to that in your brain? Because to me, again, I'm all about Shedeur Sanders. I'm all about yes, let's bring in a quarterback until we find one. But is there a world where maybe we can do that scenario that I just kind of laid out for you?
Well, it's an interesting question, because I do think, ultimately you want, and you and I have talked about this many times, right? You want a quarterback on a rookie deal, especially a starting quarterback, because boy, that sets you up really nicely to address the rest of the needs on your team. At the same time, could they trade? The free agency class isn't great, but the trade market, you never know who somebody's going to trade. Is somebody going to trade a franchise quarterback? That's the difficulty there. I think, if they look at Michael Penix Jr. as their franchise quarterback of the future, are they willing to give him up? That's the key. And I just think that the Raiders, and I agree with you, both those players that you mentioned are great first round draft picks, right? But I think you have to, depending on how it was down, and you don't know what's going to happen in the offseason. But my guess is, Murph, that it would be very difficult to get Penix. And the risk would be for the Raiders to be without a quarterback, even though that comes, you're talking about a trade that comes before the draft. Even if you did it before the draft, I just think that they got to focus on that and figure out what they can do to get that quarterback. And who knows, maybe they do something wild. Maybe they're able to get 2 first round draft picks in the top 10 picks and get 2 of those guys, right? Get a quarterback and get somebody Travis Hunter will probably go top 5, but or top 10, whatever it may be.
But Jeanty might be the back half of the first round. And I think that there's a world if the Raiders have a high second, they can trade back into that second round and get him. And I think that would be a dream scenario for us, is that you draft, Dion makes his play. It's not just daddy ball. Dion and Shedeur make their play. Shedeur Sanders is part of the Raiders, or Cam Ward, and I think it kind of falls off a cliff from there. But I look at and I mentioned Hendon Hooker too, because I think that there's a world where you look at, okay, Goff is going to be high level for a while. Cousins is going to be high level for a while. And you mentioned that rookie contract, and it is incredibly strategic nowadays for a football team to take advantage of those rookie quarterbacks. Well, what are they going to, if you've got Kirk and Goff going off still for a few more years? What if the Lions win a Super Bowl this year? Are they going to pay Hendon Hooker when it comes time for his contract? And I just look at that as at some point, those contracts are going to become a liability for the teams, for those players, especially if they're high functioning teams. And so we'll see what the Falcons end up doing. But I don't know. I feel like there's, again, we're going highly speculative here, and we got a long way to go. But I just think that if the thinking has been for us as fans is everyone's we even saw that in the chat tonight, tank. The team has to tank. The team has to tank so we can get a quarterback. Yeah, but there might be another world where we don't have to depend on being in the top 3. Because I'm with you. It's Travis Hunter's going to be up there. It's going to be Shador. It's going to be Cam. Like those are probably your top 3. You know what I mean? And so if we're in the 5 slot, if we're in the 6 slot, does that mean that we're out of it? I don't think so. I think there are other ways. And the longer this season has gone on, and the more that I listen to the pros, and the more that we see somebody like an Ashton Genty play and Travis Hunter, whatnot, I think that there are other scenarios that can be favorable for the Raiders if inserted into the right occasion. Obviously, we have to improve on the offensive line. We got to get Christian Wilkins back. We've got to address some more defensive positions. There are more things to be done for the Raiders, but I think that also to your point, you've got to draft successfully. That's another thing that I've said this week is like, quit worrying about where we're going to draft, and let's worry or be more considerate about the idea. Let's do well where we're at, and that's what the Raiders did last year, and that hasn't been the Raiders' story for numerous years, Scott.
Well, and I think a lot of that comes down to the quarterback because, as you said, you have the top 2 quarterbacks, and then it kind of falls off a little bit. I actually like some guys under that. I know, though, from an excitement standpoint, and that's the other thing I would say to you, Murph, too, about and I think your option, if they're able to acquire a different quarterback a different way, I think that's always on the table. I think you also have to look at it as what is the perception? If you can go up and get one of these young quarterbacks, the excitement that comes with them for both the fan base and for the team, frankly, they're saying, hey, we're going up, we're getting this kid. All 3 of those guys are going to be sitting there in New York for the Heisman presentation, right? I mean, that's the way I look at it with Travis Hunter too. So you're going to have that. So I think that the Raiders just have to show that they're doing everything they can to get the best quarterback that they think can be their guy for the next 10 years. If that's Michael Penix, fine. If it's Cam Ward, fine. If it's Shador Sanders, great. I think anything less than that, and people are going to be disappointed. And I think it would be tough for this organization because you have to get that guy. You have to be able to go out and get that quarterback. Doesn't mean they're always going to work out, right? But you have to try and do it anyway, especially in a year where you're going to have $90 million. So you're going to be able to go out and supplement other areas of your team, not only in the draft, but in free agency. And quarterback, just free agency is nothing. There's nobody there really to speak of. So that's kind of where I fall down on it. But Murph, before we get going here, and I see a lot of people saying that it's depressing. Jordan said it's depressing talking about the draft at a post-game show in November. Yes, I hear you, Jordan. But and of course, Tropical Remy is saying that it's therapy. So good. I'm glad you find it therapeutic. But Murph, one of the things we always talk about in here is the One Nation Foundation, what you guys do to raise money. I sent you pictures of something we're working on earlier today of something that's going to be cool when we were able to announce it to do with the foundation. But check out what Murph's going to tell you now, because we love his organization and what he does to help charities associated with Raider charities. But so tell everybody about how they can get involved with One Nation Foundation, what it is, and what you guys do.
Thank you, Scott, so very, very much. And I would say those folks that are being critical, and they're not even critical, I would say they're friends of ours, but like, what else do you want? You want us to just like talk about all the deficiencies of this Raiders team at this point? Like, let's talk about the future instead. As Al Davis said, the greatness of the Raiders is in its future. So thank you, Scott, as always, for the platform for the One Nation Foundation. The One Nation Foundation is a nonprofit that we founded back in 2019 when we realized that we could make some money with Raiders Fan Radio, and we decided quickly we wanted to give all that money away. So we give it exclusively to Raiders-related charities like the Biletnikoff Foundation, the Max Crosby Foundation we've given to, with the good folks at Raider Dad who are taking underprivileged kids and their parental figures to Raider games. We've given it to them and numerous other entities and organizations. And so we've got some corporate sponsors. We've got some advertisers. We've got some direct donations, which are the ones that we appreciate the most, because those aren't companies. Those just, Raider Nation and hardworking folks giving their money directly to the foundation. And so we just ask for your support of Raiders Fan Radio. If you could support us, that helps, again, generate advertising revenue. And 100% of that money gets given away to those Raiders-related charities. So check us out, RaidersFanRadio.com. We are on the YouTubes each and every Wednesday. That is at Raiders Fan Radio. That is Wednesday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And so we thank you very, very much for your support of the foundation and look forward to growing this thing to new heights next year. With the corporate sponsors we have, and also too with Scott and your involvement and what we've got working. And I don't know how much we can give away, but we've got something going on that could create a banner year for the foundation. We presented a check to the Biletnikoffs for $10,000, for $15,000. I don't know how much money we've given them over the years, but we could do a good job of eclipsing that number by a good amount, and also along with the folks at Raider Dad. And again, I also want to say this too, is that it's not us, man. It's like, yes, we're the foundation, but we're just a vessel. I'm a knucklehead with a microphone that likes to talk about my favorite football team with my best friends. It is the generosity of Raider Nation and everything that you do to uplift not only our shows, like Silver and Black today here, but also to uplift the One Nation Foundation is all about you guys, and we cannot thank you enough for that support. So thank you, Raider Nation, and thank you, Scott, for the platform as always.
Oh man, no, thank you guys for everything you do, and can't wait to talk about moving in next year, because we thought we were going to do it this year, this project we're working on, and it took a lot longer than that, and you guys will see why. But it's going to be fun, and we certainly do that. Yeah, make sure you follow Murf, of course, on X at _Murf, MURF, and Raiders Fan Radio. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your audio, but also on YouTube, where you can check in with them. Wednesday nights are a blast. You have to do that. I say sit down with a drink. When I watch it, I got a drink and a cigar, and I'm watching you guys having a blast. So I recommend that people do the same thing as well. But certainly great work there. And Michelle, Jeff, everybody associated with it does great stuff. And we certainly appreciate you guys being a part of our show here. And of course, it is simulcast over on Raiders Fan Radio too, over on their channels, which is why we get some of the chats that come through from the other, which is kind of cool. So thank you guys for all listening, and thank you for your donations continuing and going on. All right, Murf. Well, got another week. We'll see what the Raiders are able to put together. We'll see what this week brings us, but we'll be back here next week, you and I, to talk about what happened with the Raiders. So I thank you for being with me, my friend.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Scott, as always. And I want to give one last shout out to Michael Mayer. Great to see you back on the field, young man. And we don't know what it was that you were dealing with, but big prayers and big thoughts coming from us in Raider Nation. I'm glad to see you back on the field, and can't look forward enough to what you and Brock Bowers will do together in the Silver and Black. So let's go, Scott. Let's get a double. How about a double? Huh?
It'd be nice, although everybody's going to be rooting against the W's, but that's okay. I'm with you. You always want your team to win. So I'm with you on that one. I always want my team to win. I don't care. But shout out to Mary, by the way, on the way out, $5 donation, who says, isn't it all about coaching? The Niners were as bad as until they got Kyle Shanahan. What bothers me, AP took 10 weeks to find his best online. Okay. Mary, thanks for the comment. We appreciate that as always. Murf, thanks, man. Take care of yourself, huh?
Thank you, brother. See you next week, Scott. Let's go, Raiders!
There we go. And thanks to all of you guys for being with us here on the postgame show powered by our good friends at BetUS. And before I leave, I got to tell you one more time about this, because I just want you guys to get this deal, 150% sign-up bonus. If you guys are betting football or whatever you're betting, soccer, whatever it is you're into, check it out. YouTube 150 is the promo code. If you use that code, you're going to get 150% up to $2,000 on your first deposit. On your second and third deposit, they're also going to give you 125%. That's right. So you get an extra bonus. So use the code YouTube 150 from our friends at BetUS, and you can enjoy your sports betting a little more with a little more cash. You got to like that. So anyway, but we're going to be back here on Tuesday. Mo Moten and I will be back to talk about Raiders football. We'll recap a little bit about what happened today. Again, more in depth on the X's and O's and what we saw with the changes after we watched the film. But we certainly appreciate you guys being here, and we invite you to come back on Tuesday. And don't forget, subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your audio. Just look for Silver and Black today. Don't forget to rate and review. Also, check us out on YouTube if you're watching us on Facebook or Twitch or wherever you're watching us. Thanks for doing that. Make sure you subscribe on those channels too. For everybody here, including our producer, Mike Robier, and for Murf at Raiders Fan Radio, I'm Scott Gulbransen. This has been